Are locked in, and I'm your host, Algenon Cash. Welcome back for another exciting episode. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I really think you're going to get a lot of value out of today's conversation. Hope everyone has made it out to vote early, but if you did not vote early, you've got one more day to do it. Tomorrow is election day, so we are right in the throes of election 2020. Huge, significant turnout already for early voting across the country. Well over 100 million people have already voted, somewhere well over 3 million right here in North Carolina. So a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about this year's election. Tomorrow should be a big day. We're expecting probably somewhere around 50 million people across the country will vote tomorrow. So we anticipate that when it's all said and done, voter turnout will be somewhere around 150 million people. That's up from 137 million people who voted in 2016. So this should be a big election. I have not voted yet. I know. I told you all that I was going to do it this past Friday. I didn't do it. I tried to go on Saturday, but I realized at the last minute they closed at 3:00. So I got down a little later than I wanted to be. But I am going to go vote tomorrow. Don't worry about me. Don't come to my house. Don't be calling and texting in the morning trying to tell me I need to go vote, because I promise you that I am going to definitely get out and vote, let my voice be heard, because I do think this year's election is so critically important. And it's just so important that we all vote. And as I always like to tell you, when I tell you to get out and vote, I am not trying to tell you who to vote for. I am trying to tell you to get out, vote your conscience, vote for what you believe in, make sure you know the issues, study the issues, and make sure you know what's going on when you go to vote. But I'm not going to tell you exactly how to vote. And so right in the middle of election 2020, and this is always true with every election, we have a lot of these sort of get out the vote rallies and get out the vote events where different types of organizations on the right and the left are trying to encourage their supporters and voters to actually go vote. And so this past Saturday, we had a rally that was actually held in Graham. And I will tell you that when I saw some of the images coming out from this rally, I had to ask myself, was this the 1960s or 2020? And if you don't know a lot about it, let me just give you a little bit of backdrop on sort of what happened this past Saturday in Graham, North Carolina. So North Carolina sheriff's deputies and local police pepper sprayed a group of mostly Black demonstrators, including young children. I've read some reports where children the age of 5 years old were pepper sprayed.
As young as 3, yeah.
And these folks were pepper sprayed while they were marching to the polls to vote. Of course, State Attorney General Josh Stein has already came out and condemned the whole event, as well as Governor Roy Cooper. About 200 people participated in the I Am Change March from a church to the polls to encourage people to vote in the town of Graham in Alamance County, right here in North Carolina. It was organized by a local pastor, but it also included the mayor of nearby Burlington, Ian Baltutis. Ian, how are you this afternoon?
I'm good. Good to be with you.
Well, just to give my listeners some context, I've known Ian for I'm using first names because I've known Ian for quite a while. We were in a one-year leadership development program that was hosted by Duke University. And I enjoyed meeting everybody that was in our group, but I really enjoyed Ian. Ian is a young guy, graduated from Elon University and came out and became the mayor of Burlington, but he's also a small business owner. He's very entrepreneurial. He and our politics are not the same. So that always made for great conversation during these weekend retreats that we would have for an entire year. But I can say honestly that after spending a year with Ian, I learned a lot from him. Felt like I learned some good value and some good things, and hopefully he's able to say the same about me. So Ian is the mayor of Burlington. Ian, you were out at this event on Saturday. I've seen some of the images. My listeners have heard about the event. They've seen some of the images. But how did it feel to actually be on the ground when all this was happening this past Saturday?
Once things really started to get active, it was, the only way I can describe it is otherworldly. As a mayor now in my third term, I've been to hundreds of rallies and events like this where you've got a stage and a public place, you've got a list of speakers and a large crowd. This was really no different than any of those. If anything, it was better organized than many, well attended, and seemed to be generally going along as usual, until all of a sudden we were faced at the stage with a wall of sheriff's deputies in SWAT gear and gas masks. And then, as you described it, then there was pepper spray. So it was an otherworldly event for what's generally been a very active and I think positive civic engagement year for voter turnout.
And you mentioned, as well as the report, I'm going to read a couple more excerpts from this report, but you mentioned that it was all of a sudden. Let's go more into detail there. I mean, when this whole when the pepper spraying and the dispersing of the crowd started, were there any warnings? What did the group get too rowdy? Did they do something to actually incite the police to react this way, or what caused all this to start happening?
And that's, I think, the question of the whole event, and the question that's going to be answered hopefully over the coming weeks as people sort through all the details, all the video, all the footage and photos and audio of this event. Which is, it was a strange kind of start and stop of activity, in that we marched down the street. We did a moment of silence, 8 minutes and 46 seconds for George Floyd, in front of the Confederate monument in Graham. And then the organizers directed everyone that a stage would be erected on the courthouse property, and we would wait for that stage and then take our places. And less than a minute later, we heard barking commands from police officers telling folks to get out of the street. And say shortly thereafter, there was pepper spray in the air. So, but then it calmed back down as they got the stage erected, and we took our places. Speakers started talking. Folks were behind the barricades at the courthouse. About 45 minutes to an hour of speakers and cheers and chants, like any march or organization. And then all of a sudden you had deputies in SWAT gear step out of the courthouse and start attempting to take equipment from the organizers. And then again, more pepper spray directly over the stage into people. And then they backed off, and then we got a verbal warning to disperse. So as a mayor and somebody who's been advocating for police reform in a way that is accountable to the community, this was bizarre, and violated so many aspects of de-escalation that we've been talking about nationwide. The fact that you get warnings either right before escalation or after the fact.
Yeah, you know, the Alamance County Sheriff's Office issued a statement on Twitter saying that unfortunately the rally in Graham ended due to concerns for the safety of all. The Graham Police Department issued a lengthy statement saying that organizers failed to get a road closure permit for the 8 minutes of silence, and that police aimed pepper-based vapor toward the ground to disperse the crowd. So, I mean, I don't know how close you were to the actual organizers or how closely you may have been working with them, but was it that they didn't have the proper permits in place, or were they violating any kind of road laws whatsoever? Or, I mean, help us understand some of that.
Yeah, so I was not involved in organizing this event. Like many events that I'm invited to as mayor, I'm invited to speak and have a general understanding of the event. It's my understanding that there were permits issued for portions of the event. But like many First Amendment type speaking events, some of this is just generally protected. And it's the law enforcement's responsibility to ensure that first freedom of speech is guaranteed. And so, yeah, it was strange as to how it unfolded.
Yeah, because there's even another point as I'm reading through here, one of the organizers had mentioned that they, at one point through the march, they actually had police escorts from the state troopers. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, when we left the parking lot at Wayman's Chapel AME, which is just north of the courthouse square, less than a mile, before we even stepped into the road, the police, including folks in State Highway Patrol uniforms, had completely cleared the road as far as we could see to the courthouse. So it was not as if this march took the road and blocked traffic. The police had already clearly blocked the road and made way.
Now, when you say police, was that the state troopers or the actual Graham Police Department?
There were multiple law enforcement agencies there. And I know that's a factor of one, shared support agreements that we all have between departments like the sheriff and Graham PD and Burlington PD. But there were numerous agencies there.
So is it, because I guess it's just confusing to me how you've got law enforcement agencies involved and helping to protect the actual rally participants, because this wasn't even really a protest. It's more like a get out the vote rally. So you've got law enforcement involved to protect those that were a part of all this, but then you've got a different law enforcement agency that's actually going against it. So was it a situation where the right hand just didn't know what the left hand was doing, or?
I think lack of communication was probably the message of the day as far as what broke down on this, whether it was lack of communication between the different agencies, but even when you have a well-organized event with clear communication, I mean, we had a stage with a amplified sound system, and speakers like myself were able to speak very clearly and be understood by the crowd. So there was clear communication between the organizers and the attendees. And when you have an orderly event like that, my thought would be law enforcement should always work with the organizers in a clear manner, because you have folks who are there to control the crowd who are not law enforcement, who are part of this organization. And at no point in time did I see clear kind of approachment by the law enforcement to the organizers to request changes in how the event was being carried out, which is unfortunate. And I think they missed an opportunity.
Well, and then I also read I know in the report that I read, it said that a 5-year-old child was I guess mistakenly pepper sprayed. You said that you heard reports of children even younger than that, maybe 3 years old.
I've heard 3 is the youngest age. We had senior citizens there. I mean, I got hit by clouds of, it was a pepper spray kind of gas or vapor that they were spraying, which unfortunately was kind of a breezy day, so that you can't target a vapor. So it very quickly covered the entire courthouse square and sections of downtown. But I got hit 3 times by those clouds.
So what else was going on downtown? Was this like a typical downtown day where there were people down there walking around, going to eat or shop or whatever the case may be, or was downtown, more on a lockdown type status because of everything that's going on with the virus?
Unfortunately, I'd say this was fairly typical in downtown Graham, with the Confederate monument still standing. Graham's become a fairly hot spot for protests and rallies happening pretty much every weekend. As we see these monuments come down around the state, we knew that if our monument continued to stand in Alamance County, it would attract more and more attention, and it has done that.
And so there was obviously, I guess, for lack of better words, and I don't like using the word protest because when I read about the event, it doesn't sound like a protest event. But I'm assuming there were counter protesters that were also downtown.
There were a handful of folks who were just kind of off to the periphery on the square, which is, again, common for these type of activities. But nowhere near the level and the kind of loudness or noise level that have previously encountered events.
And then I also read there was about 200 people associated with the actual protest itself or the rally itself. The objective was to actually march and be able to go vote, which this whole incident disrupted that in terms of the pepper spray and everything that happened with the sheriff deputies. So what happened with those 200 people? Were they able to cast their vote, or did the whole event get shut down after the crowds were dispersed? Or
so definitely when the event got shut down and dispersed, it threw off the ability for us to direct folks to the polls. I know that was a big part of my comments when I spoke, was encouraging folks to vote, not to vote for any particular person, but to get out and vote. And speaking about that, it's a block away. When we finish, we're going that way. However, when the tear gas started flying, they shut down Elm Street and refused to let people go down that way, which was the direct route to the polls. Which was concerning. I know Attorney General Stein has been starting to gather information. He's made some comments and created a link for folks to indicate if they feel voter suppression took place. But it definitely threw off the rhythm of the event, which was targeted on bringing people into downtown Graham, because there is a countywide early vote site. As per most of North Carolina statutes, the early voting is one stop, which means if you live in Alamance County, you can go to any of the stations. And that one was a block away.
So it almost sounds like to me, I mean, once the crowds were dispersed, they were somewhat, to some degree, um, um, uh, moved away from being able to go vote, which to me would sound a lot like, voter suppression for sure.
Yeah.
Um, it's been a strange year anyway. I mean, obviously COVID-19 and everything that has happened because of COVID-19 with the businesses shutting down and barbershops and all the things that's been going on. But it's also been a really interesting year in terms of some of the civil unrest, whether it be in smaller towns like Graham or much larger cities like a Portland or Seattle. It just seems like there's hundreds of these types of events going on almost on a daily basis. I believe, and I want to get your reaction to this. I believe at the heart of all of this is just an inherent distrust that people have for the police at this point. And you see it within these events and these rallies and these protests where people are just really, really frustrated. You've got people that are calling for the dismantling of police departments because they're so frustrated. You got some people that want police departments to be defunded because of the frustration they have. But I think really at the center of all of it is just a lack of public trust. And people are losing faith in these public institutions, whether it be law enforcement or even, quite frankly, city and state government to some degree. How do you feel, and you're someone that's been really close to this, when you have an event like what happened in Graham over the weekend, I mean, what does that do to public trust? And what do we need to do going forward to try to rebuild it?
I think you're spot on with your analysis there and kind of why we see some of these flare-ups. The Burlington and Graham and Alamance County have been this unique, if anything, test case where we see similar rallies in Burlington that are entirely peaceful. We've had events with hundreds of people attend, and myself, our police chief, other elected leaders from Burlington show up, and we mingle among the crowd, and we talk, and we make ourselves available. And that's something we've been doing for years. So we've been able to build a relationship of trust and transparency with the community. And as a result, when concerns arise, people can approach us and we make time to meet with them. And then we don't just listen, but we actually apply and act on the requests that they're making. And that's one of the reasons that I've stepped up and been available, showed up at these types of events and rallies all across our county, is because in order to diffuse these situations and to rebuild that trust, we have to be available as elected leaders. And I know there are many, many mayors across the country who are leading by example and doing that same thing and seeing peaceful results in their community. And so I think the best thing we can do to diffuse this is to make ourselves available, to humble ourselves, and to be among the people who put us in office.
Well, you also bring up another good point. When I was getting ready and preparing for today's show and this discussion, I was going across Facebook. Facebook's the new town square. That's where everybody talks at. So I was going across Facebook trying to get people's reaction to the event itself. And obviously there was a number of people who applauded and commended the fact that you were there and you were present. And from what I could tell, you didn't leave once once the pepper spray came. You stayed the entire time. But there was also some people that were scratching their head and saying, why is my mayor? I'm a Burlington resident. Why is my mayor over in Graham at this rally? What would you say to some of your constituents that might be scratching their head about your involvement in an event that wasn't, right in their backyard or your backyard?
I'd say simply enough, we're all residents of Alamance County, and Graham is our county seat. And so when we talk about county politics, when we talk about a conversation that's more than just the boundaries of Burlington, which voting and civic engagement, all that is, then I'm just as welcome to be there as a Graham resident. And as a community leader, it's my responsibility to work with other community leaders in other jurisdictions. And so events like this cross those boundaries, and they are not city specific.
Are there any more of these events planned? I mean, I know tomorrow is the big election day, and anything like this planned for tomorrow?
I believe Reverend Drummite did announce that he was planning some type of event in the morning tomorrow. I don't think it'll be anywhere near this scale, but as we get into the actual voting day, I think you'll see most people actually out at the polls or volunteering or working in some way, as opposed to being at rally events like this.
What are your thoughts on? I see. In fact, you and I have a really good mutual friend, Derwin Montgomery, who's a state house rep, former city councilman here in Winston-Salem. And Derwin and I also co-host the Chronicle Live every Monday, Wednesday night. So that's a little bit of a plug for us because we'll be on tonight at 8 o'clock. Derwin has called for the Alamance County Sheriff to resign. What are your thoughts about repercussions? I mean, what recourse should fall on the sheriff's office? But it also sounds like maybe the police chief in Graham. I mean, should they resign? I mean, what should happen next?
I'm not going to call for their resignation until we have more information about exactly what all transpired. I know the Graham Police Department in their press conference yesterday announced that they'll be compiling and distributing a timeline of events that they saw, because no one in that courthouse square, no individual saw everything that happened. And so until we have more information about all of that, and we can really analyze it in a just manner, I think it's too early to call for resignations like that.
Yeah, you just need to do a little bit more fact finding so you can be clear about what happened. If you're just now joining us, man, you are so late to the party, but you are locked in, and I am Algenon Cash. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The other voice that you hear with me this afternoon is Mayor Ian Baltutis of Burlington, and there was in my characterization a tragic event that happened in Graham this past Saturday at a Get Out the Vote rally. I want to clarify because I think so many people have seen the images that have came out of this weekend. I know the New York Times did a story on it. Huffington Post has done a story on it. And many people thought it was some kind of a protest. I actually thought it was a protest when I initially saw it. And once I read more into the report and realized that this wasn't even a protest by any stretch of the imagination, it was really more of a Get Out the Vote rally. This was something that was designed to try to motivate people to get to the polls and actually vote in this really important election. But it came to somewhat of a quick end when sheriff deputies deployed pepper spray on these local residents that were attending this event. And so this story has made national news. Ian is here giving us a little bit of the insight on what actually happened on Saturday and sort of where we may go from here. You know, Ian, across the country, there are calls for defunding the police. And, you know, I think some people really mean defund the police. They want law enforcement agencies shut down. And then there are some people who are saying they don't necessarily want the police to be defunded, but more so they want dollars to be reallocated so that there is more money going into mental health, and so you don't get an incident like you get with Walter Wallace up in Philadelphia and so many of these other tragic incidents that it feels like we've read about too often throughout 2020. You're the mayor of a town. You're charged with keeping a large number of residents safe and providing services to them. How do you feel about some of the people who say defund the police? Where do you come down on an issue like that?
So I'm not going to say defund the police, dissolve them entirely. As the George Floyd murder was unfolding, we approved a city budget with a $17 million line item, which is one of our largest line items in the city for law enforcement. But I think it's opening up a very important piece of the conversation, which is that we've asked our law enforcement officers to do a lot of different things in our community. And some of them are not best delivered by law enforcement officers. Some of them are really best delivered by other community organizations or non-uniformed officers, including mental health is a huge one, and addiction treatment and recovery services. And so this is a really good opportunity for the community to get involved in shaping how we can better apply those funds to be more effective, and to break down that law enforcement line item into really a prioritization of what works in our communities. And so I commend Burlington and our citizens for stepping up and helping us craft what we're calling our community police advisory team, which is coming together now, but it is designed to help elevate that conversation, bring in all the pieces, and help provide recommendations for policy and practice to our police department for them to incorporate. This is definitely an overdue but very important conversation to be having Law enforcement plays an important role in our community. There's some great officers out there, but every department has improvements that can be made.
I know you're part of some real large national groups with other mayors from around the country. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we've seen this sort of social or civil unrest persist throughout 2020. I think it's going to continue to persist as we go further. How are some of your peers responding in communities across the country? What are some of the things they're doing?
They're doing a lot of the same things I've talked about. They're building that community relationship of trust. They're bringing their organizations into the fold. They're making sure that their police departments have that community outreach and are accessible. And they're convening these conversations because we all, as municipal leaders, look at our communities as laboratories to experiment. They don't give you a playbook and say, this is what you're going to do for eternity as best practice. We're all innovating new best practices every year and learning from each other. So through organizations like National League of Cities, North Carolina League of Municipalities, we're able to share and innovate very rapidly, especially in times of change like this.
Yeah. As we get ready to wrap up, I was also reading a different headline today. There's been these incidents, I would call them, around the country now, where you've got Trump supporters that are showing up and blocking people from being able to get to the polls or blocking people from attending rallies or events. It seems like it's gotten to a new level of what I would call aggressiveness and confrontation. Tomorrow is a big day. Like I said earlier, I think we are predicting, at least around the country, you could have somewhere around 50 million people showing up to vote at polling locations all across the country. It also seems like this is a really hyper-charged environment this year. Any predictions about how tomorrow may go? I mean, any thoughts on whether or not are you predicting that we might see some confrontation and God forbid violence, but any thoughts about what may happen tomorrow? Anything that maybe you all as a community that might be doing to try to be proactive for what may happen tomorrow?
In my heart, it makes me sad that we're even having to have that conversation because I've always felt that civic engagement, the more people come out and vote, the more people participate, the better our government gets. That's a democracy. And so the fact that engagement is starting to begin to look like confrontation at the polls is really unfortunate. It's something that has come across our agendas as mayors is what are we doing to prepare for what the fallout looks like on November 4th? What are we doing to consider community civil unrest that might unfold in the coming days after the election? And I hope that our communities are strong enough to recognize that elections happen every year. This is an ongoing process of crafting our democracy and evolving our leadership, and that one day does not break our country, and that we can all continue to work towards these communities that we know, that we love, and that we apply ourselves to every day. So I'm hopeful that things stay peaceful, but I know we all need to stay vigilant as well.
Now, I'm praying for the same. I've gotten a couple of questions from some listeners today asking, what do I predict is going to happen tomorrow, depending on who wins? And, is the right going to have some kind of violent reaction to President Trump not winning? Or is there going to be a violent reaction from the left if President Trump does win? And, I pray that it won't come down to any of that, and that we can all be mature and respectful and honor whatever the majority of voters decide tomorrow. And I think the incident that happened down in Graham over this past weekend, it's completely it's shameful, and there's just no place for this any longer. And so I appreciate your leadership, man, and being down there and locking arms with all the event organizers and attendees and so forth. And I'm sure the people of Burlington also appreciate your leadership in such a perilous time as we're calling it, right now. So I did hear you say there's an investigation going on. So it sounds like we'll get more clarity about what actually happened on Saturday, and then what the repercussions of that will be as they conduct this investigation. Is that investigation being conducted by Attorney General Stein, or is that being or someone else that's looking at that?
I believe, as per kind of any police incident, there'll be some internal investigations with Graham PD and also the Sheriff's Department. But I know Attorney Stein has also indicated there'll be some investigation regarding voting activity. But I think you'll probably see that culminate in some type of larger overall investigation. And those processes take time, but that's important because there's a lot to review. There's a lot that was going on around that courthouse square, and it's important to consider all together in the overall situation.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that if people were doing the right things, they don't get in trouble for doing something that they were doing that's correct. And I think a lot of times, especially in this country nowadays with social media, we are a little too quick to pass judgment and without trying to go through the process of figuring out that investigation. And I know with your leadership down in Burlington, despite the fact the election day will come and go tomorrow, I do think that investigation needs to continue. And if there was wrongful action taken by the sheriff's department or the police department, there certainly needs to be some recourse. People should never feel threatened about coming out and voting or even attending an event that's associated with voting. We should be always wanting open elections and wanting people to feel comfortable about participating. Ian, I really appreciate you doing this with me this afternoon, man. We got to get some, I know now if I'm looking for another business to get into, I'm gonna open some barbershops in Burlington. And just with you alone, we might be able to make some profits. But no, I like the bushy top, man. I like what you're doing there. I love what you're doing in Burlington. And I really, really appreciate you locking in with me. If any of my listeners wanted to follow up with you, I know you're on social media. How can they get in touch with you?
Social media is a great way. Send me an email. I'm easy to get a hold of. I'm at my heart an entrepreneur and a member of the community. So I believe that real change, real progress happens face to face. A little less so now that we're in COVID, but those individual conversations are really what make our society and help us build partnerships. Even when we don't always see eye to eye like you and I do, we do share interests and we do share goals. And so glad we could have this conversation. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, I've learned way more from people like you and Derwin Montgomery and James Taylor and so many others out there that are of the opposite party and maybe even to some degree the opposite philosophy or ideology that I have. But I think we're great examples of what this country really is about. I mean, two people with two different opinions ought to be able to come together, have a conversation and come to some agreement that's going to be the best for all of us. So again, thank y'all for joining us. If you like what you heard today, there's a little button down there that you can click and just let me know you liked it. There's also a share button. So you'll be able to share this conversation with others who might want to learn a little bit more about what happened in Graham this past weekend. Or maybe you just really enjoyed meeting Mayor Ian Baltutis and you want to share this conversation with some folks. Make sure you do that. This conversation will be up on YouTube later tonight. So if you're not a subscriber, make sure you go to YouTube, subscribe to the page. You'll get a notification when that happens. And then, of course, this same conversation will replay on WTOB and Truth Broadcasting and so forth. So again, thank y'all for being here with me. I'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow's election day. If you have not voted, make a plan and make sure tomorrow you do get out to the polls and let your voice be heard. Y'all stay locked in. All right, man, we're good to go.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you for the invitation.
No, man, thank you for that. That was